What no one tells you about leaving a narcissist is what comes next. So now that you're out, all the yelling and mind games are behind you. And while that should feel like a huge relief, it doesn't always land that way. So sometimes it's the quietest moments that feel the worst because you're still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And when it doesn't quite feel safe to relax, most of us end up bringing the chaos back in through a doorway in our own minds. And before you know it, you're stuck in a storm that no one else can see. So if this resonates with you, if peace feels like a void and part of you keeps reaching back toward the chaos, you're not broken. There's a name for that pattern, and the quiz below can help you uncover it. My name is Christina, and after experiencing years of emotional chaos in my own life, I know how disorienting it can be when the noise suddenly stops. Because even when things go quiet, your mind and body don't always feel safe in the stillness. But if we don't recognize what's happening, or if we keep trying to outrun that discomfort instead of healing it, we can end up building an entire life around avoidance. And there's a story that captures this feeling better than any clinical definition could. It follows a woman who tried to build peace by controlling every detail around her. You see, Wanda had lost the person she loved the most. Everything that grounded her was gone, and the grief that followed didn't just hurt, it disoriented her. The world around her felt jagged and unsafe, like it could collapse again at any moment. So she built a world of her own, and not metaphorically. She created it piece by piece inside her own mind. And in this world, her partner was still alive. The town was quiet and the neighbors were kind. It was calm. But eventually, that calm began to waver. There was one neighbor who would hesitate mid-conversation, like something inside of him was resisting the lines he'd been given. And at one point, a voice crackled through the radio. It was someone from the outside asking if Wanda could hear them. And after a while, time didn't even behave the way it should. So there were moments that repeated and conversations that restarted. Faces kind of flickered, and Wanda definitely felt it. The edges of her world were coming apart. But instead of letting go, she clung tighter. And we'll come back to Wanda's story. But what she created isn't just fiction, it's a mirror. And I've seen that same structure show up in real people's lives. It's what happens when your nervous system doesn't trust the environment, so it builds control instead. And to bring this back to you, if your nervous system has lived in chaos for long enough, it doesn't automatically recognize calm as safety. You see, it recognizes what's familiar. And if unpredictability became your normal, peace can absolutely feel disorienting. But most people associate trauma with the loudest moments, the yelling, the threats, the blow-ups. But for many survivors, the most lasting damage happens after those moments end. When conflict is all you've known, its absence doesn't always feel like relief. It can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling, like something's about to shift and you just haven't seen it yet. And this actually mirrors something researchers observed in a very different setting. So you've probably heard of Pavlov and his dogs. You know, the Russian scientist who trained his dogs to associate the sound of a bell with food. And over time, the dogs started to salivate at the sound of the bell alone, expecting what usually followed. And most people think that's where the story ends. But what happened next is far more fascinating. You see, during one of his later experiments, Pavlov's lab flooded, and the dogs were trapped, and they nearly drowned. And when everything was cleared up and the researchers started testing again, they noticed that something major had changed. The dogs didn't respond to the bell anymore. In fact, they didn't respond at all. All of those familiar patterns that researchers were able to replicate over and over again just weren't working anymore. You see, the trauma had disrupted what they'd been trained to expect. The signal that once meant something safe and predictable had lost its meaning. And that kind of gives a whole new meaning to the term emotional flooding, right? Psychologists started using that term much later on, but it describes the same thing. Your system gets pushed too far, and suddenly the old signals just don't work anymore. And it doesn't just happen in labs, it happens in real life, especially when you've spent months or years living in a constant state of emotional tension. So, if you've lived in a pattern of emotional abuse, where calm was followed by chaos, or affection was used as bait, your nervous system learns to stop trusting the signal. Even when things actually are safe, your body doesn't register it that way. It keeps you on high alert just in case. When the calls stop, when the messages go silent, and your life is technically your own again, your body and mind may still feel restless. You may find yourself pacing the room, replaying conversations, or maybe feeling pulled toward memories you'd rather forget. And none of this happens because you miss the pain, but it happens because your nervous system is still searching for the next hit of intensity. It feels kind of like, since the other shoe is going to drop anyway, you may as well have a hand in controlling the chaos. So we bring all that stuff in to bring in the chaos that we feel is inevitable. And it feels like there's some form of safety in doing that. And this part of recovery can be incredibly confusing, especially if you've done all the right things on paper. So you've blocked them, you've journaled, you've said out loud more than once, I know they're not good for me. And still, you feel pulled back in. Sometimes you feel pulled toward the person, and sometimes you feel pulled towards the pattern. But no matter what, that pull doesn't mean what you think it does. It's just what happens when your body's been conditioned to mistake chaos for aliveness. And there's a study that explains this pattern in a way that's hard to unsee. So in the 1950s, researcher B.F. Skinner placed pigeons in a box with a lever that, when pecked, sometimes released food. But the reward didn't come every time. It came unpredictably. And what happened next is exactly what happens at casinos, and also what abusers rely on. The pigeons became obsessed. They pecked the lever constantly, even more than they did when the food came consistently. The unpredictability made them try harder. Later studies linked this to dopamine. You see, our brains don't just release dopamine when we get what we want. It releases it in anticipation. And when the outcome is unpredictable, that anticipation becomes addictive. And yes, it's the same principle behind slot machines. You don't win every time, but the maybe is enough to keep you playing. And now think about how that maps onto a narcissistic relationship. The cycle of love bombing, withdrawal, blame, reconciliation, silence, and then another breadcrumb of affection. That is variable reinforcement. And your nervous system, whether it liked it or not, learned to expect that rhythm. So when it all stops, when there's no text crisis, no emotional high, you don't just feel free, although there may be some free feelings in there. You actually feel untethered. And your body tries to fill the silence with whatever felt normal, even if that normal was painful. So now let's talk about what to do with all of this. The quiet recovery method. So this isn't about forcing yourself to feel peaceful. That doesn't work. It's about helping your nervous system learn what peace actually is. Because if it's never felt safe before, or if it's been a long time since you felt emotionally safe, it's not going to feel natural right away. And earlier, we talked about Wanda, a woman who built an entire world to keep her pain at bay. And she didn't do it because she was weak. She did it because part of her believed she had to hold everything together to survive. And a lot of survivors do the same. They keep smiling, they keep functioning, keep pretending the calm feels good, even when it doesn't. And so then we looked at Pavlov's experiment. The dogs weren't choosing to ignore the bell. There was no choice there. They had been overwhelmed by something so frightening and so all-consuming that their old responses just stopped. Their systems couldn't trust the signal anymore. And that's what trauma does. It teaches your body that even the things that should feel safe might come with a cost. And then there was Skinner's study, the pigeons pecking relentlessly because they didn't know when the reward was coming. And that randomness and unpredictability, it created obsession. And that's the same principle that shows up in toxic dynamics. The love bombing, the withdrawal, the little breadcrumbs that keep you chasing. And all three stories reflect something that happens in real life. Your system adapts and it learns through exposure. And even after the chaos ends, the pattern doesn't just disappear. You have to teach your body something new. And that's what this method is all about. Not healing all at once, but slowly shifting the way your nervous system responds. So calm doesn't feel like something's wrong, and silence doesn't feel like punishment. It starts with noticing the moment peace feels uncomfortable and choosing not to run from it, not to analyze it or fix it, just to name it for what it is, a moment of unfamiliar safety. And from there, you start giving your body new experiences to hold on to. So start small, start with tiny experiences repeated often. So maybe it's a quiet cup of tea, a walk without checking your phone, or a soft voice that doesn't turn sharp. So here is where you can rely on people you trust and people who love you to show you that peace can be safe. And over time, you begin to fill that space that chaos used to take up with steadiness, meaning, and moments that don't have to be intense to be real. So we have covered a lot of ground here today. And so now I want to talk about what this really means for you. When we left Wanda earlier, she was holding together a world she created to avoid her grief. And it worked for a while. She got to pretend everything was fine, that nothing had been lost, and that peace could be manufactured if she just stayed in control. But eventually, she had to face what she was avoiding. And she finally allowed the illusion to fall away. Not because she wanted to suffer, but because she was finally strong enough to feel what was real. And when she stepped back into the world she'd been hiding from, she was still standing. And yes, some of you may recognize this story. It's part of a Marvel series called WandaVision. And while her story is fictional, the feeling behind it is very real. That moment of choosing truth over illusion, or grief over control, and peace over performance. That's what this work is all about. So just because peace might feel foreign now, it doesn't mean it'll always feel that way. And just because your system was trained to expect chaos doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means that you just adapted. And that's good news because it means you're adaptable. So just like you adapted to that, you can also adapt to peace and happiness. And if this resonated with you, you might benefit from learning more about that intermittent reinforcement and how abusive people really hijack your survival system to keep you on the hook. And so I'm going to suggest watching this video right here next, because that's where I break that all down for you, not in clinical terms, but in metaphorical terms that are a lot easier to digest. So go ahead and give that video a watch. And before you go, like this video if you haven't already, and I will see you next time.